Elena Carter had never believed in curses, hidden secrets, or ghost stories whispered through small forgotten towns. She believed in facts, in paperwork, in old property records, and in the comforting certainty that every mystery eventually had a rational explanation. That belief was the only thing keeping her sane as she drove through the endless winding roads leading toward Black Hollow, a nearly abandoned town buried deep between dense forests and steep hills. Rain hammered against the windshield of her car while fog rolled across the road like drifting spirits. The GPS signal had vanished nearly 20 minutes ago, leaving her with nothing but faded road signs and a growing sense of unease. She had inherited Ashmore Manor from her grandmother, Evelyn Carter, a woman she barely knew. Elena had met her only twice as a child. Her parents rarely spoke about her grandmother except to mention that she had chosen isolation over family decades ago. Then, 3 weeks earlier, Elena received a phone call informing her that Evelyn Carter had died at the age of 93. The old woman had left everything to Elena: the manor, the land, and a collection of handwritten journals. At first, Elena planned to sell the property immediately. She lived in Boston, worked as an architectural historian, and had no interest in restoring a decaying mansion hidden in a forgotten town. But curiosity slowly began consuming her after she started reading the journals. Most entries were ordinary descriptions of weather, repairs, gardening, and village gossip. But scattered throughout the pages were strange warnings. Never open the lower door. Some things survive by being forgotten. The basement must remain sealed. Elena assumed her grandmother had become paranoid in old age. Still, the repeated references unsettled her. Especially the final entry written just 2 days before Evelyn's death. If Elena returns, she must never go below the house. The road finally opened into Black Hollow. The town looked frozen in time. Dark storefronts lined empty streets. Rusted signs creaked in the wind. Most windows were boarded shut. A few dim lights glowed behind curtains, but Elena saw almost no movement. She parked near a small diner with a flickering neon sign. Inside, silence spread the moment she entered. 5 people sat scattered around the room. Every one of them looked at her. Not casually, not curiously, fearfully. A waitress in her 60s approached slowly. "You're a Carter," she said. Elena blinked. "How did you know?" "You have Evelyn's eyes." The waitress glanced toward the windows as if nervous someone might overhear. "You shouldn't stay at the manor." Elena forced a polite smile. "I'm only here for a few days. That house should have burned down years ago." One of the men sitting nearby muttered, "Nothing down there dies." The waitress shot him a sharp look. Elena felt irritation rising. "Look, I know the house probably has local legends attached to it, but I'm not superstitious." The waitress leaned closer. "Your grandmother spent 50 years keeping something locked away." Elena laughed nervously. "Locked away what?" The woman's face went pale. "She never told us." Ashmore Manor stood at the edge of town beyond iron gates tangled with dead vines. Even through the storm, the mansion was magnificent. Tall Gothic towers rose above black stone walls. Massive windows reflected flashes of lightning. The entire structure looked less like a home and more like a monument built to imprison memories. Elena unlocked the front door. Dust filled the air. The smell of age and damp wood surrounded her. Yet despite decades of isolation, the house remained strangely well preserved. Furniture sat untouched beneath white sheets. Chandeliers hung overhead like frozen waterfalls. Portraits lined the walls. One portrait immediately caught her attention. A young woman stood beside Evelyn Carter. The woman looked almost identical to Elena. On the frame, engraved in gold letters, was a single name: Clara Carter. Elena had never heard of her. Thunder shook the house. Somewhere upstairs, a door slammed. Elena froze. She told herself it was wind. Still, every instinct warned her that she was not alone. That night she unpacked in one of the guest rooms. The manor groaned constantly around her. Pipes rattled. Floors creaked. The wind whispered through cracks in the walls. At midnight, she heard something else. A sound beneath her feet. 3 slow knocks. Elena sat upright in bed. Silence followed. Then again. Knock, knock, knock. The sound came from below the house. From the basement. She grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the hallway. The corridor stretched endlessly in darkness. Portraits watched her from the walls. As she passed them, she noticed something strange. Every portrait in the manor showed members of the Carter family. And every single one had the same expression: fear. The basement door was located behind the kitchen. Unlike the rest of the manor, this door looked newer. Heavy iron chains wrapped around it. Several locks hung from thick steel bars. And across the wood, carved deeply by hand, were dozens of words repeated again and again. Do not open. Elena stared. The knocks stopped. A cold breeze brushed her neck. She turned quickly. No one stood behind her. But on the dusty floor nearby were fresh footprints. Bare footprints, leading away into the darkness. The next morning Elena searched through the manor for answers. She discovered dozens of journals hidden in Evelyn's study. The oldest entries dated back nearly 70 years. At first they described grief. Clara Carter had disappeared at age 19. No body was ever found. The town searched for weeks. Then strange things began happening. People reported hearing voices underground. Livestock vanished. Several residents disappeared near the woods surrounding the manor. Then came the final entry about Clara. She came back. After that, the writing became unstable. Sentences slanted violently across pages. Evelyn described hearing Clara wandering through the house at night despite having buried her beneath the basement. Elena reread the line repeatedly. Buried her. Her heart pounded. There was no explanation, no details, only terror spilling across every page. Another journal contained newspaper clippings. Missing persons, accidents, unexplained deaths, all connected to Black Hollow. All occurring over decades. And nearly every article had one location circled in red ink. Ashmore Manor. Late that afternoon, Elena visited the town library. The librarian, an elderly man named Walter Green, became visibly uncomfortable when she mentioned the manor. You should leave while you still can, he whispered. I just want answers. Walter hesitated before unlocking an old cabinet. Inside were files covered in dust. Your grandmother asked me to hide these. The files contained records from the 1950s. Psychiatric evaluations, police reports, medical documents. Clara Carter had supposedly suffered from severe hallucinations. She claimed voices spoke to her from beneath the house. She became obsessed with tunnels hidden under Black Hollow. Then came the final report. Patient became violent after excavation beneath family property. Excavation. Elena looked up sharply. What excavation? Walter swallowed. There were rumors about old tunnels beneath the town. Some said they were built long before Black Hollow existed. By who? No one knows. He leaned closer. But your Aunt Clara believed something lived down there. That night the storm worsened. Rain crashed against the manor while thunder shook the walls. Elena sat in the study reading journal after journal. Most entries became increasingly incoherent. Evelyn described scratching sounds beneath. Evelyn described scratching sounds beneath the basement floor. Whispers inside the walls. Doors opening by themselves in the middle of the night. One entry, written in jagged trembling handwriting, repeated the same sentence across 2 entire pages. She keeps asking me to let her out. Elena slowly closed the journal. Her hands were shaking now. Outside, lightning flashed across the black sky, illuminating the towering windows of Ashmore Manor for only a second before darkness swallowed everything again. Then she heard it, a faint sound drifting through the hallway. Footsteps. Slow. Dragging. She froze in her chair. The footsteps continued above her head. Someone was walking on the second floor. Elena grabbed the flashlight from the desk and stepped carefully into the corridor. The manor felt colder now, almost frozen. Her breath fogged faintly in the air as she moved toward the staircase. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed against her ears. Elena. The whisper floated down from upstairs. Her heart nearly stopped. It was a woman's voice. Soft. Broken. Almost pleading. Elena. Please help me. The flashlight trembled violently in her hand. Every instinct screamed at her to run back to her room and lock the door, but curiosity pulled her upward one step at a time. The second-floor hallway stretched endlessly beneath flickering candle-shaped lights mounted on the walls. Most of the doors remained shut. Except one. At the far end of the corridor, a single door stood slightly open. A thin line of darkness waited beyond it. Elena approached slowly. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet. Then she noticed something wet on the floor. Mud. Fresh muddy footprints led directly into the room. Bare footprints. The same ones she had seen near the basement. She pushed the door open. The room inside looked untouched for decades. Dust-covered old furniture. Torn curtains swayed gently beside cracked windows. A vanity mirror stood against one wall. And hanging above the bed was another portrait of Clara Carter. But this portrait was different. Clara wasn't smiling. She looked terrified. Her hands were pressed against the painted frame as if she had been trying to escape from inside it. Lightning flashed again. For one horrifying second, Elena thought the portrait had moved. She stepped closer. The painting looked normal again. Then she saw words scratched into the dusty mirror. Don't listen to her. Elena spun around sharply. No one was there. Suddenly the bedroom door slammed shut behind her with tremendous force. She screamed and rushed toward it, but the handle wouldn't move. Something whispered directly behind her ear. She opened the door. Elena turned violently. The room was empty, but the mirror had changed. New words slowly appeared across the glass as if invisible fingers were writing them from the other side. She let it in. A loud crash thundered downstairs. The entire manor shook. Elena finally forced the door open and sprinted into the hallway. She raced down the stairs toward the sound. The basement door was open. The chains lay scattered across the kitchen floor. One of the heavy locks swung slowly back and forth. Someone had opened it. Cold air poured upward from the darkness below, carrying a smell of wet earth and something rotten. Elena, the voice came again. This time from beneath the house. She stepped closer despite every ounce of fear inside her. The flashlight beam revealed ancient stone stairs descending far deeper than any normal basement should. The walls looked old, far older than the manor itself. Strange symbols had been carved into the stone. Some resembled human faces screaming in agony. Others looked almost impossible to understand, twisting into shapes that hurt her eyes if she stared too long. Another whisper drifted upward. So lonely, Elena swallowed hard and descended slowly into the darkness. The air became colder with every step. Soon the kitchen light above disappeared entirely. Only her flashlight remained. At the bottom of the staircase she entered a massive underground chamber. Her breath caught instantly. The place looked ancient beyond imagination. Huge stone pillars rose into darkness overhead. Rusted chains hung from the ceiling. Symbols covered every wall. The ground was littered with bones. Human bones. Hundreds of them. Some looked ancient. Others looked disturbingly fresh. At the center of the chamber stood a circular pit surrounded by black stones carved with symbols identical to the ones upstairs. And beside the pit stood a woman. Long black hair. White dress. Bare feet covered in dirt. Clara Carter. She looked exactly like the portrait upstairs. Elena's entire body locked with fear. Clara slowly turned toward her. For a moment neither of them moved. Then Clara smiled. You came home. Elena stepped backward instinctively. That's impossible, she whispered. You're dead. Clara tilted her head strangely. Dead things don't speak, Elena. Her voice sounded wrong somehow. Not human. As if several people were speaking together beneath her words. Elena noticed dark stains covering Clara's hands. Dirt packed beneath her fingernails. And something else. Blood. You need to leave, Elena whispered. Clara's smile widened unnaturally. It won't let you. A deep sound suddenly echoed from inside the pit. A low breathing noise. Slow. Heavy. The ground beneath Elena's feet vibrated softly. Something was alive down there. Something enormous. Clara stepped closer. Elena, do you know why Evelyn sealed the basement? Elena said nothing. She thought she trapped me. Clara's expression twisted. But she trapped all of us. A cold wind burst upward from the pit. Whispers filled the chamber instantly. Hundreds of voices. Crying. Begging. Laughing. Elena, help us. Stay. The flashlight flickered violently. Then Elena saw movement inside the darkness below. Faces. Human faces emerging from the shadows inside the pit. Dozens of them. Their mouths opened silently as they stared upward. Elena stumbled backward in horror. Clara reached out slowly. It remembers everyone who enters. The whispers grew louder. Now Elena recognized some voices. Her mother. Her father. Even her grandmother Evelyn. Impossible. Tears filled her eyes as Evelyn's voice echoed from the darkness. Don't trust her, Clara suddenly screamed. The sound was inhuman. Her body jerked violently as if something beneath her skin was moving. Bones cracked loudly. Her smile widened far beyond what should have been possible. You shouldn't have listened to Evelyn. The pit exploded with movement. Long black tendrils shot upward from the darkness, slamming against the stone floor around Elena. The chamber shook violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. And from deep below, something began climbing upward toward them. The sound of claws scraping against stone echoed through the chamber. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Elena backed away from the pit, her breathing ragged. The flashlight beam trembled across the walls, catching glimpses of movement in every corner. The shadows no longer looked still. They pulsed gently like living things. Clara stood motionless near the edge of the pit, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. It's waking up, she whispered. Another violent tremor shook the chamber. A massive shape moved beneath the darkness below. Elena could hear breathing now. Deep, wet, ancient. Then came the smell. Rotting earth mixed with something metallic and foul, like old blood sealed underground for centuries. Elena, Evelyn's voice whispered again from inside the pit. Run. For one brief second Clara's expression changed. Fear crossed her face. Real fear. You need to leave now, she said suddenly. Elena stared at her in confusion. I thought you wanted me here. Clara's black eyes shifted toward the darkness below. I did. Something enormous slammed against the walls inside the pit. The entire chamber shook so violently that cracks spread across the floor beneath Elena's feet. But it wants you more. A long arm suddenly emerged from the darkness. It wasn't fully human. The skin looked gray and stretched tightly over bones that bent in impossible directions. Fingers far too long scraped slowly across the stone edge of the pit. Then another arm appeared. And another. Dozens of them, pulling something upward. Elena couldn't breathe. Faces slowly emerged next. Human faces fused into one shifting mass. Men, women, children. Their mouths opened and closed silently while their eyes rolled wildly in terror. The creature climbed higher. Its body had no stable form. Parts of it melted constantly into shadow before reforming into flesh again. Some faces cried. Others screamed. Others smiled. Elena. This time the voice came directly from the creature itself. Every face spoke together. We remember you. The flashlight died instantly. Darkness swallowed the chamber. Elena screamed. Then pale blue light slowly began glowing from the symbols carved into the walls. The chamber illuminated just enough for her to see the creature clearly. It towered near the pit now. At least 15 feet tall. Its entire body was made from writhing human forms merged together like living wax. Thousands of eyes blinked across its surface. Some looked ancient. Others looked disturbingly fresh. One face suddenly pushed outward from the creature's chest. Evelyn Carter. Her eyes locked onto Elena desperately. Don't let it touch you. The face vanished back into the flesh. Clara stepped backward slowly. It lied to me, she whispered weakly. The creature turned toward her. Its countless mouths stretched into smiles. You opened the door. Clara began shaking violently. I thought it would bring them back. The creature moved closer. And it did. Suddenly dozens of hands burst from its body and grabbed Clara. She screamed. For a horrifying moment Elena saw Clara sinking slowly into the creature's flesh while hundreds of faces pressed against her body from inside, pulling her inward. Elena! Clara shrieked. Help me! Elena rushed forward instinctively, but icy fingers wrapped around her ankle. Hands were emerging from the stone floor again. Pale human hands clawing desperately upward. One grabbed her wrist. Another touched her face. Cold whispers flooded her ears. Stay with us. Don't leave us alone. It hurts down here. Elena kicked free and stumbled backward toward the staircase. The creature watched her calmly now. Almost patiently. Its shifting body continued growing larger. The blue symbols around the chamber flickered rapidly as if weakening. Then Elena noticed something carved into the stone beside the stairs. A sentence written in old faded letters. The gate closes with blood. Her heart pounded violently. She looked around desperately. Near the wall rested an ancient rusted knife beside several melted candles. The creature began moving toward her. Each step produced horrible wet cracking sounds. Faces stretched across its body reaching toward her. Some were crying. Some begging. One looked exactly like Elena. Join us, her own face whispered. Elena grabbed the knife. The blade trembled in her hand. The creature stopped. Every voice inside it suddenly became silent. As if waiting. Clara's face briefly appeared near the surface of the creature's chest. Please, she whispered weakly. Don't let it out. The symbols on the walls dimmed further. Cracks spread across the chamber ceiling. The thing was escaping. Elena stared at the knife. Then at the ancient words carved into the stone. The gate closes with blood. The creature smiled. You belong to us. It lunged forward. At the exact same moment Elena sliced her palm with the knife and slammed her bleeding hand against the glowing symbol beside the staircase. The entire chamber exploded with light. The creature screamed. Not with one voice. With thousands. The sound shook the underground chamber like an earthquake. The symbols across every wall ignited bright white. Chains hanging from the ceiling suddenly snapped tight around the creature's body as if pulled by invisible force. It thrashed violently. Faces stretched outward screaming in terror. No. The pit behind it began pulling everything inward. A powerful wind erupted through the chamber. Bones, chains, dust, and debris flew toward the darkness below. Clara's face appeared again among the writhing bodies. This time she looked peaceful. Thank you, she whispered softly. Then she vanished forever into the creature's flesh. The pull became stronger. Elena struggled desperately to hold onto the staircase railing as the chamber collapsed around her. Stone pillars cracked apart. The ceiling began caving in. The creature screamed continuously while being dragged backward toward the pit. Its countless hands clawed against the floor trying to resist. But the glowing symbols only burned brighter. One final deafening shriek echoed through the underground chamber as the entire creature was pulled screaming back into the darkness below. Then the pit sealed shut. Instant silence followed. Elena collapsed to the floor gasping for air. The blue lights faded slowly. The chamber was dead again. But above her, the manor groaned loudly. Cracks raced across the ceiling. The entire house was collapsing. Elena forced herself up and ran toward the stairs. Behind her, the underground chamber crumbled into darkness forever. Elena ran. Her feet slammed against the stone steps as the entire structure behind her began to die. The underground chamber groaned like something alive being torn apart. Dust and debris rained down the staircase. Every few seconds, chunks of stone broke free and vanished into the collapsing darkness below. Above her, the manor itself was screaming. Wood cracked like gunfire. Walls shifted. The air filled with a deep hollow sound, like the house was no longer holding itself together. She burst through the basement doorway just as the iron frame behind her twisted violently inward. The kitchen floor buckled. Cabinets split open. Glass shattered everywhere. Elena. A voice called from somewhere outside. Walter. She stumbled forward blindly through smoke and falling plaster, barely able to see. The front door was hanging off its hinges, swaying in a wind that shouldn't have existed inside a collapsing house. Outside, the storm was gone. The sky was wrong. Strangely still. Gray. Empty. As if the world itself was holding its breath. Elena ran out of the manor just as the entire structure folded inward behind her. Ashmore Manor didn't explode. It collapsed silently, like something enormous had finally stopped holding it up from below. The stone walls sank into the ground with a deep, final groan. Towers tilted and disappeared into the earth. The land swallowed it all slowly, deliberately, until nothing remained but a flat scar of broken soil. Elena fell to her knees in the wet grass. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Walter and a few townspeople stood at a distance, watching in silence. None of them spoke. No one moved. It felt like even they understood that speaking might break something. Minutes passed. Or maybe hours. Elena couldn't tell anymore. Then the ground trembled once. A low vibration spread outward from where the manor had stood. Not violent. Not loud. Just present. Like something turning over in its sleep far beneath the earth. Walter finally walked closer, his face pale. It's sealed, he whispered. Elena didn't respond, because she could still hear it. Not with her ears, but inside her mind. A faint echo. A memory of thousands of voices layered together. We're still here. The townspeople began slowly backing away from the ruins. One of them dropped their lantern and it rolled across the grass, its flame flickering weakly. Then the lantern went out on its own. Elena looked down at her hand. The cut she made in the chamber was gone. No scar. No wound. Only smooth skin. Her stomach tightened. That shouldn't have been possible. Walter, she said quietly, her voice breaking. Did it work? He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the ground where the manor had disappeared. We don't know, he said finally. That was the wrong answer. Because deep down, Elena already knew. The silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like waiting. That night they brought her to a small house at the edge of Black Hollow. No one wanted her inside the town proper. Not anymore. Not after what had happened. They left her alone with a bottle of water and a locked door. But Elena didn't sleep. She sat by the window watching the empty land where Ashmore Manor once stood. Nothing moved. Not even the wind. At around 3 a.m., she heard it. A soft knock. Not at the door. Beneath the floor. Knock. 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 Elena froze. Her eyes slowly lowered to the wooden boards beneath her feet. The sound came again. Patient. Familiar. Like it had all the time in the world. Then a whisper followed it. So quiet she almost missed it. Elena. Her breath caught. The voice wasn't Clara this time. It was hers. Elena stood up slowly, her entire body tense. The floorboards beneath her creaked softly. And for one terrifying moment, she saw it. A thin line of dirt had formed across the corner of the room. Like something had begun pressing upward from below. Not breaking through. Just waiting. Elena stepped backward. The knocking stopped. Silence returned instantly. Too fast, too perfect. She ran to the door and tried it. Locked. Of course it was locked. She turned back to the room. The dirt line was gone. Everything looked normal again. But the air had changed. Heavier. Closer. Like the room was no longer entirely separate from whatever lay beneath it. Elena pressed her back against the wall and slid to the floor. Her mind raced through everything she had seen. The creature. Clara. The pit. Evelyn's warning. The symbols. The blood. The door was never the prison. It was the entrance. Her hands clenched tightly. Then she noticed something she hadn't seen before. On the underside of her wrist. A faint mark. Not a cut. Not a scar. But a symbol. Very faint. Almost like something had been pressed into her skin from the inside. Her breathing stopped. Outside, somewhere far beneath the town, something shifted again. Slowly. Patiently. As if learning the shape of the world above it. And then, just before dawn, Elena heard it one more time. Not knocking. Not whispering. Just one simple thought, placed directly into her mind like a sentence she didn't remember learning. You are the next door. Elena didn't move for a long time. The word sat inside her mind like a foreign object that refused to dissolve. You are the next door. At first she tried to reject it. She told herself it was trauma, exhaustion, hallucination. Anything rational. Anything safe. But then the mark on her wrist pulsed faintly. Not pain. Recognition. She jerked her sleeve down immediately, heart racing, and backed away from the wall as if the room itself had become unsafe to touch. Outside, dawn began to creep in, but the light didn't feel natural. It looked dull, filtered, as if it was passing through something before reaching the world. Elena stepped toward the window again. Black Hollow was waking up. Or pretending to. People were moving in the distance, going through motions that looked normal from far away. But something was off. Their movements were slightly too synchronized, like they were following an unseen rhythm. She pressed her palm against the glass. Cold. Then, for a split second, she saw it. Not the town. Not the street. Something beneath it. A layered impression of tunnels, stretching in every direction like veins under skin. And within those tunnels, countless shapes shifting slowly in the dark. Elena stumbled backward, pulling her hand away. The vision vanished instantly. Her breathing turned shallow. No, she whispered to herself. No, no, no. A knock came at the door upstairs. This one was different. Not from below. From above. 3 slow knocks. Then a pause. Then her name again. Elena. It was Walter. She hesitated before moving, her body stiff with suspicion. Every instinct told her that nothing was what it seemed anymore. She opened the door slowly. Walter stood outside looking older than he had the day before. Exhausted. Like he hadn't slept in years instead of hours. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at her wrist. Elena instinctively pulled her sleeve down. Walter didn't react. That mark, he said quietly. It wasn't there when you came out. Elena's throat tightened. It appeared after. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he feared. That means it didn't end below the manor. A cold silence followed. Elena forced the question out. What does it mean then? Walter looked past her into the house, not meeting her eyes. It means the seal didn't close. He finally stepped inside, and closed the door behind him. That small action made Elena feel instantly trapped. Walter moved toward the center of the room and placed a worn leather folder on the table. His hands were shaking slightly. I should have told you everything before you went down there, he said. Elena didn't sit. I want the truth now. Walter opened the folder. Inside were maps. Not just Black Hollow, but cities, continents. Old markings spread across the world like constellations. Elena's stomach tightened. What is this? Walter pointed at one symbol. The same one from the basement walls. The same structure exists everywhere, he said. Not just here. Black Hollow was only one access point. Elena shook her head slowly. You said it was sealed. It was contained, he corrected. There's a difference. A long silence stretched between them. Then Walter added something softer. And containment always leaks. Elena felt a slow dread spreading through her chest. So it's not gone. Walter didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. Finally he said, when you used your blood, you didn't close it. You marked yourself into it. Elena stared at him. That doesn't make sense. It does if the thing underneath doesn't see doors like we do. He tapped the map again. It doesn't open places, Elena. It connects them. A chill ran through her. Walter continued, voice low. It doesn't live under the earth. He paused. It uses the earth. Elena's mind flashed back to the tunnels. The faces. The voices. The impossible feeling that the underground wasn't a location, but something else entirely. A structure of awareness. A network. A mind. She whispered, so what am I now? Walter looked at her for a long time. Then he said something that made the room feel suddenly too small. A node. Elena stepped back. No. Walter nodded once, reluctantly. That's why it can reach you now without breaking anything. As if to confirm his words, the light above them flickered once. Then again. From somewhere far beneath the house, the knocking returned. But this time it wasn't random. It was patterned, structured, like a message being written. Elena covered her ears. It's inside everything, she said, her voice breaking. Walter looked exhausted. Yes. The knocking continued. Not louder. Just clearer. As if the distance between here and there had shortened. Walter closed the folder slowly. There's something you need to understand, he said. Elena looked at him. His expression hardened. It's not trying to escape anymore. A pause. It's mapping the surface. The room went dead silent. Even the knocking stopped. For the first time, Elena realized something far worse than everything she had seen before. The silence wasn't peace. It was focus. And then her wrist mark pulsed again. Once. Twice. Like a signal being returned. From everywhere. All at once. Walter's words settled into the room like a weight that refused to lift, and Elena felt as if the very air around her had thickened, as if the house itself was listening to every breath she took. The mark on her wrist pulsed again, faint but undeniable, like a second heartbeat that did not belong to her. She tried to step away from it, from Walter, from everything he was saying, but there was nowhere in the room that didn't feel connected to something deeper now, something vast and patient beneath the surface of reality. Walter didn't move as he spoke again, his voice lower this time, almost careful, as if even words could awaken something. He explained that what they had called a seal was never meant to end anything, only to delay it, to confuse it, to scatter awareness across distance so the thing beneath could not fully align itself into the surface world. But Elena was not just someone who had witnessed it anymore. She had been marked in a way that bound her perception to it, and through her, the network could now sense structure, language, even thought. As he finished speaking, the knocking began again, but it was no longer coming from a single direction. It came from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, all at once in a slow, synchronized rhythm that felt deliberate rather than chaotic. Elena backed into the corner of the room, her eyes scanning for something solid, something normal, but even Walter now looked uncertain, as if the rules he had believed in for decades were dissolving in real time. The windows outside shimmered faintly, not with light, but with distortion, as if something enormous was pressing close from the other side of existence. And then Elena realized something that made her blood run cold. The knocking was not trying to get in anymore. It was already inside the pattern of the house, already inside her thoughts, already syncing itself with her heartbeat. The mark on her wrist grew warmer, almost gently, and in that moment she understood with horrifying clarity that the entity was no longer beneath them. It was learning how to exist above without ever needing to rise. Walter's words settled into the room like a weight that refused to lift, and Elena felt as if the air itself had thickened around her, turning every breath into something heavy and uncertain. The faint pulse on her wrist returned again, subtle but persistent, like a second heartbeat that did not belong to her. She kept staring at it, hoping it would fade, hoping it would prove itself meaningless, but instead it grew more consistent, as though something far away was testing her response and learning from it. The house no longer felt like a shelter or even a place at all. It felt like a thin layer of separation between her and something vast that was beginning to understand her existence. Walter remained still, watching her with an expression that carried both sympathy and fear, as if he had seen this moment in some form long before it arrived. He spoke again in a low, careful tone, explaining that what they had always called a seal was never designed to destroy anything. It was only meant to scatter perception, to fragment awareness so that whatever lay beneath could not fully synchronize with the surface world. But now Elena was no longer just an observer. She had become a point of connection, a living reference the entity could use to map reality beyond the underground. Through her, it was no longer blind. As the words sank in, the environment around them began to shift in ways that were subtle at first but impossible to ignore. The silence in the house was no longer natural. It felt structured, as if it had been arranged deliberately to focus attention. Then the knocking returned, but not in a single direction. It came from everywhere at once, walls, floor, ceiling, each impact perfectly spaced, forming a rhythm that felt almost like language. Elena stepped back instinctively, her breathing shallow, as the realization formed slowly in her mind that the sound was not trying to enter the house anymore. It was already inside it, integrated into its structure, like an idea that had learned how to inhabit space. Outside the windows, the world itself appeared slightly distorted, not broken but misaligned, as though the surface of reality had developed a thin separation from whatever lay beneath it. Walter noticed it too, his face tightening as he realized the implications of what he was seeing. The entity was no longer confined, no longer restricted to tunnels or buried chambers. It was adapting to the surface by understanding patterns, sound, structure, memory, and Elena was now part of that learning process. The mark on her wrist warmed again, gently, almost like recognition, and in that moment she understood the most terrifying truth of all. It was not trying to return to the surface, because it had never truly left it. Elena stepped away from the window as the distortion outside deepened, her reflection in the glass lagging behind her movements by a fraction of a second. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable at first, but once she saw it clearly, she could not unsee it. Her reflection was not perfectly synchronized with her body anymore. It moved with a slight delay, as if something within the glass was still learning how to imitate her properly. Walter noticed it too, and for the first time his expression lost all remaining certainty, replaced by something closer to dread. He reached for the leather folder again, flipping through the pages with slightly trembling hands, stopping on a page filled with overlapping diagrams and handwritten notes. According to the oldest records, the entity had never been stationary. It had always existed in a distributed state, fragmented across deep geological structures that acted less like tunnels and more like nervous pathways. Entire regions of the Earth had behaved like dormant connections, waiting for activation through awareness. And now, through Elena, that activation had begun again in a controlled but expanding pattern. Elena tried to process what he was saying, but her attention kept drifting back to the mark on her wrist, which now no longer pulsed randomly but in steady intervals, like a signal being answered from multiple locations at once. Each pulse felt synchronized with the faint knocks that continued throughout the house, and with every cycle, the rhythm became more stable, more deliberate, as if something was assembling itself into coherence using her as a reference point. She pressed her hand against the wall instinctively, and for a brief moment, she felt it, an answering vibration from the other side, not physical impact, but recognition. The realization hit her slowly, then all at once. It was not trying to break in because it did not need to break anything anymore. It was aligning. The house, the town, the ground beneath them, even the smallest structural patterns of sound and silence were beginning to fall into a shared rhythm. Walter stepped closer, his voice low but urgent, telling her that if this alignment stabilized fully, separation between locations would collapse entirely. Distance itself would become meaningless, and every sealed point in the world would begin responding as one system. Then, without warning, the lights in the room dimmed, not through failure but through interference, as if something had reduced the concept of brightness itself. The knocking stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt artificial. Elena held her breath, waiting for something to happen, and in that exact stillness, she understood that silence was not absence anymore. It was preparation. Her wrist mark stopped pulsing. For the first time since the manor, it remained perfectly still. And somewhere far beneath everything, something finally answered back without sound, without movement, but with absolute certainty that it had learned enough. The silence did not last. It deepened first, becoming so dense that Elena could feel it pressing against her ears like physical pressure. Walter didn't move, but his eyes shifted slowly across the room, as if he was listening to something that had no sound. The stillness had structure now, the kind of structure that suggested intention rather than absence, and Elena realized with growing dread that the system Walter had described was no longer testing, it was transitioning. Her wrist mark began to change again. Not pulsing this time, expanding. A faint dark line spread outward from it like ink bleeding beneath skin, forming delicate branching patterns that crawled slowly up her forearm. Elena stumbled backward in shock, gripping her arm, but Walter immediately grabbed her wrist. "Don't resist it," he said sharply, his voice strained. "If you resist synchronization, it accelerates." Elena stared at him in disbelief. "You're telling me to let it happen?" Walter hesitated, and in that hesitation she saw the truth. He didn't have control over this anymore. None of them did. The knowledge he carried was only observation, not prevention. The room around them flickered. Not with electricity, but with perception. For a split second, Elena saw something layered over reality, an overlapping structure beneath the walls, like an echo of the world constructed from impossible geometry. The house was no longer just a house. It was becoming a node in something far larger, its walls aligning with invisible pathways that stretched beyond physical space. Then it vanished again. Walter stepped back slowly, his voice quieter now. "It's stabilizing through you," Elena shook her head, panic rising. Stop saying that like it makes sense. But it did make sense. Terrifyingly so. Every event, every knock, every voice, every vision, it had not been random intrusion. It had been calibration. The entity had been adjusting itself through her perception, refining how it interpreted surface reality by using her mind as a translation layer. Outside, the world began to respond. Distantly at first, then more clearly, Elena could hear faint knocking echoing far beyond the house, not from below, but from everywhere. From streets, from buildings, from beneath cities she had never seen. A global rhythm emerging slowly, imperfectly at first, then increasingly coordinated, like scattered systems trying to synchronize into a single heartbeat. Walter whispered, almost to himself, it's spreading through recognition. Elena's breath caught. Recognition of what? Walter looked at her directly, and his answer was almost impossible to hear. Of you. The moment he said it, the patterns on her arm stopped expanding. Everything froze again. The silence returned, but this time it was not empty. It was focused. Elena felt it immediately. Something vast had paused its expansion, not because it was blocked, but because it was observing her more closely now. Evaluating. Refining. Then, softly, inside her mind, a voice returned. Not Clara. Not Evelyn. Not even the layered chorus from before. This one was simpler. Calm. Curious. You are becoming understandable. Elena backed away slowly, shaking. Get out of my head. Walter closed his eyes, as if bracing himself. It's not inside your head, he said quietly. Your head is inside it. The words landed too heavily to deny. Outside, the first real sign of global disturbance began. Far beyond the house, in cities that had never known Black Hollow, underground structures that had been dormant for centuries began responding in faint, synchronized pulses. Not destruction, not emergence, awakening. And in every place where stone lay deep beneath human foundations, the same rhythm began to form. Knock, knock, knock. Elena pressed her hands over her ears, but it didn't matter anymore. Because the sound was no longer coming from outside. It was coming through everything that separated inside from outside. And somewhere in that growing, unified silence, something finally finished learning her name completely.